Hi, and welcome to today's Onc Data podcast. This week's clinic conversation of the week is coming from Dr. Matt Hadfield, who's here to be discussing last week's accelerated FDA approval of Zenocutuzumab for non-small cell lung cancer and pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. Excited to hear more about this approval.
Thank you so much. So I'm Matt Hadfield. I'm a medical oncologist at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and I focus in early phase clinical trials and cutaneous malignancies. And I'm really excited to talk about zenocutuzumab. It's a very big and important approval in two diseases that have very limited options, unfortunately.
Awesome. It's really exciting. So for background, I'd like to tell us a little bit about the drug itself, its mechanism of action.
Yeah, so it's actually a very interesting mechanism of action that's different than other drugs that we've used previously. So Energy One, Neuregulin One is a protein that binds the Herceptin, the HER2 HER3 pathway, and then when constitutively activated, it can activate the PI3 kinase pathway, which essentially contributes to cancer cell growth and proliferation. Previously, we had tried using HER3 or HER2 targeted therapies to try and block based on good rationale, but this drug actually acts by binding that specific protein. So very interesting mechanism of action and very a new option in this patient population.
Awesome. So I can tell us a little bit about like the background about the approval, who it's approved for, and then a little bit about the trial that it was based on.
Yeah, so this was based on the phase 2 Energy trial, which was a multi-center, multi-cohort study that essentially that led to the approval for Zeno and pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma after previous systemic therapy, as well as non-driver mutated non-small cell lung cancer after previous treatment, most commonly in the trial with chemo IO. So just for a little background, 64 patients with non-small cell lung cancer were enrolled, and around 30 patients with PDAC were enrolled. The primary endpoint was overall rate of response, and in the non-small cell lung cancer cohort, it was a 33% overall rate of response, and in the pancreatic adenocarcinoma, it was 40% overall rate of response. So pretty good response rates in an otherwise difficult to treat population. For instance, in non-small cell lung cancer, you're looking at Taxotere typically in that setting if you don't have a driver mutation after you've gone through chemo IO or a clinical trial. And then in terms of pancreatic cancer, the response rates are very, very low after you've gotten through frontline standard of care therapies like gemcitabine and Abraxane or Folfox and things like that. So the overall or the duration of response was actually equally as impressive. So in non-small cell lung cancer, it was a median 7.4 months, and in pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, it was a range of 3.7 months to 16.6 months, which 16.6 months in this patient population, specifically with pancreatic adenocarcinoma, is pretty remarkable. And this data led to the accelerated FDA approval earlier this month. So the patient populations that would benefit most from this are those that have metastatic non-small cell lung cancer that does not have a driver mutation, as well as pancreatic adenocarcinoma after they've unfortunately progressed on front and oftentimes second line chemotherapy.
It's super exciting. So since the focus of these clinic conversations is how you'd explain like emerging research to patients, what do you plan to tell patients with NSCLC or pancreatic adenocarcinoma who might be eligible for this treatment? How is this going to affect their care?
Yeah, I think so. The big thing for patients to understand about this drug approval is that it fits into the shifting paradigm in oncology in general towards precision medicine. So when you explain this to patients, it's important to keep in mind that things like chemotherapy target rapidly dividing cells, and they work in that manner. Targeted therapy is going after specific protein mutations or gene mutations that your cancer may harbor. And why that's so important is drugs like Zeno are now becoming more and more available, and these targeted therapies rely on having whole exome sequencing and NGS testing and things like that. So we still know that a large amount of patients in the United States do not get genomic testing of their tumors, and it really has become, a detriment to their care if they're not advocating for that. If their treating oncologist is not pursuing that testing, because every single day we have new drug approvals based on uh, precision guided approaches, and having that testing to better delineate what treatment options may and may not be available for your type of tumor is incredibly important.
Absolutely. So any final thoughts about this approval? Anything else you'd like to share with either patients or with clinicians as they begin to start using it?
I think this is one of the, in my opinion, one of the ways you see the accelerated drug approval process working the best. So many of the patients enrolled in this trial were part of the phase 1, phase 2, but there was also patients enrolled as part of an early access program for those who couldn't make it to the clinical trial sites. So in many ways, this is a big win for the accelerated approval process, because we're giving a drug that is targeted with a good mechanism of action, with good rationale for why people would respond to it, access earlier to a drug that otherwise would have very limited options, unfortunately. And I also think that it highlights again just how important precision medicine is becoming in the world of oncology now. I mean, we have so many more therapies now. Immune targeting therapies, chemotherapy, obviously, but targeted therapies. And if you're a patient who's unfortunately diagnosed with these horrible diseases, you really need to make sure that you get the NGS testing or whole exome sequencing testing on your tumor to better characterize it, and make sure that you understand what the results are, because there may be treatment options either with things like Xeno that are becoming approved, or with clinical trials that maybe there's not a standard of care therapy yet, but there may be in the very near future, or maybe you could be enrolled on a trial. So it's really important to keep that in mind if you or a family member are being treated.
Absolutely. It's a great message to close on. So thanks so much for coming on today to tell us about this approval. It's a really exciting update in the field.
Thank you so much for having me.